Okay, so welcome to How to Case Study Bio 205. This is basically a kind of like a tutorial for how to do your case studies. For the most part, the case studies go on a schedule. We have one per week. Sometimes you'll have some that are grouped, so like maybe a chapter 15 and 16 are grouped together into one. But for the most part, these are your main homework assignments that we have for Bio 205. And they're probably one of our bigger assignments, not including the exams. General agenda today, we'll talk about some general info about the case studies, some of the best practices that I've seen over the last 4.5 years. We'll also go over a quick mini case to kind of show you the thought process behind how to get through your case studies the most efficiently and maximize your points. And I'll briefly cover over citations, including some commonly used citations and also where to get the citation information if you get outside resources. In general etiquette is requested for this meeting. So if you have any questions, just throw them in the chat, raise your hand. If you are remote or listening to this lecture on your own time, feel free to message myself or Dr. Cotter with any questions that you have. But for the most part, I like to keep these sessions between 15 and 20 minutes. It's pretty quick just to kind of go over most of the questions that I've gotten. And then obviously, if you have any questions after this, feel free to message me personally. So general info, like I mentioned, case studies are usually due on Saturdays. It kind of goes with our normal way. Sundays, we start with a tutorial. Monday or Wednesday, you'll come in, you'll do your lecture. And then Saturday, you will do a case study related to the material covered in that week. Chapter 5 in our case for this week, Chapter 4 next week, Chapter 6 after that. And then once we've gone through units, we'll then go into the exams. And on exam weeks, you do not have case studies. However, the exam is also case study based. So you'll have very similar case studies on the exam. And so if you practice your techniques well here doing the homework case studies, you'll do very well on the exam. Like I mentioned, this is the main homework assignment, usually works between 10 and 30 points. One of the things I've seen other students do is when they submit this case study, they'll sometimes choose to hold on to there we go. They'll choose to hold on to the 5-point bonus coupon or the success coupon. I'll just tell you right now, it's not really worth it. The math doesn't match up with that. So if you miss a case study, it's much better to use it and get the 10 to 30 points from the case study than just saving it for the end and then cashing it in for 5 bonus points. Um, how you find the case studies, the easiest way to do it is you go into your Canvas page, go into modules, find your associated unit, in this case, unit 1, go to the associated chapter, and then you'll see a chapter block case study. I'm using chapter 5 as an example. Once you open it up, you'll see you'll have a couple different links for the case study. Feel free to choose any of those to download. Doc is a Google Doc. RTF is a like a text file, like a generic text file, so you can open that on Notepad, but you may not get the images. And then PDF is just PDF. I don't know how else to describe it. Uh, what you'll see is you'll get some general instructions. So again, you'll see it's due no later than 11:30 p.m. on January 25th, which is this Saturday. It tells you some very useful things you want to look at before you attempt the case. And then you also will given some tips on some of the case studies. You can kind of see down here. I was able to highlight 4 of them, but there's a few other tips associated with chapter 5. I always recommend reading those over because some of those might help you better understand the case study. Another thing you can do is these are downloadable. So you download the Google Doc, you can type in the sections. We'll sometimes have tables. You'll have multiple choice, kind of like select A, B, C, D, whatever. If you have other, excuse me, if you have other ways of doing it, I've seen people write their answers on a piece of paper because they like to do the writing portion. That's never been a problem with Dr. Cotter as long as you submit it and the questions match up with the questions in the case study. We should be good. One thing I do want to warn you about is Dr. Cotter does change these case studies every semester. They're similar, but they're not always the exact same. So if you have some stuff from a previous semester, or if you have a friend that kind of showed you, these are the case studies. Just know that our case studies change just slightly from previous semesters, and that allows Dr. Cotter to know which one is a current case study and which one is not a current case study. We have had instances where people have submitted old case studies, and we can typically tell because it's a question that we have from our bank in 2022, for example, and they're in a 2023 class. So just download the most current one here. That way you know that you're getting the correct case study for this semester. Okay, so these are some of the best practices that I came up with that I've seen. And if you can do these things, you'll maximize your points on the case study. Obviously, this is not an end-all be-all list, and some of you might have your own way of doing it. But for the most part, if you follow some of these general topics or general practices, you'll do well. The first one I mentioned was downloading or printing your case study and looking it over ahead of time before a lecture. What this helps you to do is as you go through the lecture material, either your tutorials or the in-person lecture, you'll kind of be able to correlate what Dr. Cotter is talking about with the case study. There are some things that she mentions in the lecture that directly relate to the case study, but she won't outright say it. So if you've already read the case study, you can make that connection of, I saw this on the case study. I should probably take better notes here. I should write down whatever she writes. That way I can use it for the case study. Number two is write down any questions you have about the case study, and that way you can ask Dr. Cotter or myself in person before or after lecture or before or after lab. Again, that's just kind of getting ahead. The things that I don't want to see or that I hope that I don't see is that people download the case studies on Saturday and then they have a question about it and then they're asking us on Saturday evening, the day it's due. And because it is a Saturday, chances of me or Dr. Carter getting to you in time for you to then get the answer, go figure it out, and then turn it on time is pretty slim. So the sooner you find these questions and you can ask us about those questions, then the more likely you are to have a response, and then you can actually do well on the case study. When you do the case studies, I always recommend people start on question one and work your way down. Um, the reason for that is a lot of us, some of us have experience already in the field or you've taken other classes and you might see some microbes, some illnesses that you have seen in your field of work. And that's perfectly acceptable. I love that you were bringing your experience into the class. But one thing that happens in that instance is people start developing a bias. And so they'll think they know the right answer. They'll write down their answer based on their clinical experience, and they don't actually go back to read what questions 1 through 7 were to then get you to the question 8, which was the answer. Something kind of similar to, I kind of put some examples here. For example, stating that your microbe doesn't have flagella in question 8, when the case study doesn't mention anything about flagella until question 11. And I'll kind of show you in the mini case how that could work. Also making sure that your answers make sense. So they'll put in one step, let's say question 3, that, hey, my microbe can only be gram negative. And then 2 questions later, they're saying, oh, my microbe could be gram negative or gram positive. Well, if you eliminate it at the top, you shouldn't have it at the bottom. That just told me that they went out of order and they just kind of put generic knowledge, but they didn't really read the case study thoroughly and then go in order. Once you're done with your case study, you are welcome to submit it to me for a review. The way my reviews work is I don't give you answers, but I'll either let you know that you're on the right track. I will let you know like this is good, but add more information and look at these pages for more information. Or I might say, hey, I think you're a little bit off track here. Go back and look at these sections of the handout, these pages of the book, these pages of the study guide, and then try this answer again. And then if you want me to look at it again, just send it right back to me. That just makes sure that you're on the right track. And that way, when you submit stuff, you're submitting mostly complete work. What can happen in some of these cases, if you go in the wrong direction on question 4, then it's going to throw all your other questions down off. And then before you know it, you're getting 4 of 10, 5 of 20 on these case studies when really you just messed up one line and that's affecting all your answers before it. For the most part, I do ask you to have those reviews to me through either through Canvas Messenger or through Gmail, preferably Canvas Messenger because my work blocks Gmail, but they don't block Canvas. So at work, I can still look at it on Canvas. If you send it through Gmail, I have to wait until the morning to take a look at it. And if you get it to me the Friday night before they're due. So this one's due on Saturday. Get it to me by Friday at 11:59 p.m. Then Saturday morning, I can get home from work. I can look it over, get you the feedback, and then I can go to sleep. And this way, you're not again asking me on Saturday evening when I may or may not be driving to work. And depending on how busy I am at work, I may not actually have time to look at it. So give me a chance to help you, but to do that, I need it by Friday night. If you submit it earlier in the week, that's perfectly acceptable as well. The sooner the better, but at most by Friday night. And again, what not to do. Don't wait last minute to look at your case study or submit questions. That just causes undue stress on you, and sometimes stress on us trying to help you get the answers. And realistically, if you had started a day earlier, you would have gotten a much better grade on the case study than if you had not started earlier. Okay, let's do their little practice case real quick. So this is my case. Bread, you look a little green today. There's a picture of your bread. The case studies will have something similar, Alex. You'll be given a small little story, might be given some key information, and then it'll lead you into the questions of the case study. So in this case, you are hungry, just as we've all been hungry, we've all been there. Want to go through our food in the kitchen, and I find some cheese, some ham, and some bread. So I'm like, all right, I guess I'm making a sandwich. I take out the bread, and I notice, there's a couple of green spots on the edge of my bread, and a little bit of some white hairs on the end. And my roommate, because he lives with me, he's like, you know what? Just take it off. My mother used to do it all the time. Rip it off. The rest of the bread is good. Just eat it. But you, being a scientist, are like, well, this doesn't really look right. So let me look into it, make sure that this bread is actually good to eat. So the first step, you're going to say, hey, I just learned how to do swab in microbiology. I'll take a swab of the screen area. I'm going to send it to my friend's DNA lab across the street because I'm well connected. And they tell you, hey, this sample has 60 S40S ribosomes. Based on that information alone, what microbes on the list that I gave you, so bacteria, fungi, and protozoan, could you eliminate? So we call this differential diagnosis. Some illnesses are really hard to diagnose directly. Instead, what they do is they start eliminating or crossing off things that it could be to kind of narrow down the list of suspects until you find out a potential suspect that's causing the illness. I saw something in the chat. Let me get through the case study real quick, and then I'll go back to the question in the chat. So a good way to frame this is kind of list out, okay, these are my three microbes, and this is why I can still consider them suspects, or this is why I eliminate them. So fungus and protozoan have 60S40S ribosomes, so I still can't eliminate them as a suspect. But I know bacteria are 50S30S, so I can eliminate bacteria from my list. And then once you've eliminated a suspect from your list, you don't have to mention it again. So you might have another question that says the same thing, like, hey, eliminate this list of microbes, and you have the same list. If you've already eliminated in the first step, you don't have to mention it again in the second step. So again, that's what I started with. I just had 60S, 40S, I'm done. Step two says, oh, your friend later calls you and says, hey, I also found this thing has reproductive spores and a chitin cell wall. Now that you have new information, you can then go and continue your differential diagnosis. So based on what you learned today in class, you know that fungi have reproductive spores and chitin cell walls, but protozoans do not have either a cell wall or reproductive spores. Therefore, you can now eliminate protozoans from the list. So now you've narrowed down to, okay, based on what I know so far, it's most likely a fungi. But we learned in class today there's multiple types of fungi. And the last part, step three, at home, you know that you keep your temperature in the kitchen around 25 degrees Celsius or 7 degrees Fahrenheit. Based on this info, what kind of fungus do you think grew on the bread? And again, you know, hey, yeast grows between 35 and 40, and mold grows at under 30 degrees Celsius. Therefore, I can eliminate yeast, and most likely I have mold growing on my bread. Now, if you have ever eaten food or had bread, you probably already saw that and like, oh, that's mold. And I agree with that. But for the purpose of the case study, we got to go through the steps to eliminate this thing as mold, because that's kind of the techniques that we're trying to teach you to build. This is very simple to kind of get to where mold is the answer. But assume that you've never seen molded before in your life, you have to find steps to then eliminate microbes to get yourself to mold. Let me take a look at the chat. Oh yeah, Patrice, you
Yeah.
mentioned it. Can we eliminate bacteria? Yeah, exactly. So you kind of already understood the way I was going with. The last step in the case studies you'll get from Dr. Cotter is that they might give you some additional information, and then it asks you to identify the genus and the species. This is where the book is helpful. The book, the question will actually give you a,
Oh, my textbook came. It says it's in the mailbox.
oh, perfect. That's awesome. Just in time. So again, if you have the book in, it'll tell you, hey, look at pages, it reads through pages like 541 through 560. And if you read those pages, there'll be like two or three different suspects or microbes in there. And then you just piece together the information you have from steps one, two, and three, along with any extra information we give you in step four. And then you can write down, okay, based on this information, I have this genus, this species. Honestly, if you don't get the genus and species correct, you're not going to be docked a lot of points. Really, the way that we want you to go about it is if you do the process correctly, even if you don't get the right answer at the end, which is science, the process was still the correct process. You just got a different result than you expected. So I tell people not to stress out about the genus and species. For the most part, they're pretty straightforward. Some might be very similar, and there's like one or two pieces of information that will then tell you it's one or the other. But if you read everything else, they look very similar. But these are not cases where it's like all or nothing. You either get the right answer or nothing. You'll still get credit for all the steps that we listed, even if you don't get the correct um, microbe, genus, and species at the end. Does anyone have any question about the mini case and kind of how we went through the steps? Okay, if not, again, just feel free to reach out. And your case studies from this point forward will look very similar. You'll be giving us a short story. We'll give you a piece of information. You're going to answer the question based on that piece of information. And then in the next step, we'll give you more information. You can kind of see how if I started on step two, I could say, well, step two, it says reproductive cells and chitin cell wall. So I'm just going to put fungi in step two. And I was going to put fungi in step one because I know question two gave me this other information. Again, pretend that you're living this in real time, and where you're only giving one piece of information at a time. So just answer step one. Then in step two, you can now use information from step one. Step three can use information from step one and step two, etc. So citation. So remember that no matter what resource you use and how often you use it or how much of a resource you use, you still need to properly cite it. Dr. Cotter wants us to use the CSC format or the Council of Science Editors format. This is an example of how you would cite our common sources in our lecture. So the citation for handouts, citation for the pink infectious disease handout, citation for the textbook, and citation for the chapter or lesson builders. Feel free to take a picture of this. I'll also send this out in an announcement so you can copy and paste it. The only thing you have to change is make sure you actually change like the chapter, the unit. You'll see in the textbook tells you, edition. You either have the fifth edition, the sixth edition, or maybe an older one, and then page numbers. And then for the most part, the rest of these citations will be the same. If you decide to use an external citation, that's perfectly acceptable. Most people use websites. So for the website, you'd again start with the author or publisher. So either Cowan or Dr. Cotter. You start with the name of the textbook or the website or the article. You'll mention specific paragraphs or sections of the article if that's applicable. You'll mention who published it, and then we want to see a website link so we can go cross-check the reference. As long as you have those five things of information in there, we're not necessarily all that picky about like, oh, if you mess up the citation, you're going to get dinged on it. One thing about citations, you don't have to cite each individual answer. You can if you want to, but we just want to have all your citations at the end. So if you use page 2 for question 1 and page 3 through 5 for question 2, you don't have to cite them individually like in text citation, just at the very end of the case study, right? I use textbook pages 3 to 5, for example. And again, feel free to take a picture of this, or whenever you're watching this recording, take a snapshot, take a picture, whatever, and then you can use this to help cite your case studies. And that's it. Like I said, really quick. I think I got it under 20 minutes, or about 20 minutes. Um, from right now, is there any questions from the people in the chat or in the lecture before I close this up? Okay, if I have no questions, thank you for joining. I'm going to go ahead and post this for everyone else that was not able to join in person. And again, if you have any questions, message me. If you're done with your case study, you want that second set of eyes, send it to me. You can send it in Canvas, send it in Gmail. And I do get it back to you within 24 hours. There are some days when I might be longer, but if I get it before Friday evening, you will have it by Saturday with plenty of time to then go back and make changes. Other than that, thank you very much. Good luck on your first case study. And if I have no other questions, I will see you all next week.
All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you.